Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So in the previous episode in this build series, we went ahead and built this. And this is the new exhaust manifold for my buddy Aaron's very badass 1G DSM drag car. And this is a Schedule 10 321 stainless manifold, T4 twin scroll, etc., etc. And what we are doing today is a bunch of welding on it. So in the last episode, I was kind of at a stopping point as I was waiting for wastegate inlet flanges to arrive. Well, good news, those are here now. So we have our two 44mm wastegate inlet flanges, our two wastegate provisions, and what we're going to do to start the video off is to weld these parts together and then break this collector apart, cut holes, weld parts to cover the holes, so on and so forth. You know the way that it goes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get to it, as I'm really excited to get welding on this stuff. Both of Aaron's wastegate provisions are welded and ready to go on the sides of the collector. So here's what we ended up with. Some nice welds there, and welded inside and out on both of them. So those should be plenty strong and should never go anywhere for him. So now we need to cut the holes in the sides of each of the halves of the collector. So I'm going to go ahead and break each half off. This one I already broke off, and it is the front side. That's the rear side there, obviously, but that will make this a little bit easier to cut this hole and a little bit easier to weld up the wastegate provision, as this is going to get a little bit tricky to weld all of this together. So let me get geared up, we'll get this hole cut and get to fitting everything up, welding everything, getting the collector wrapped up. Another day of welding and fabrication in the books, and Aaron now has a completed merge collector, I guess aside from sanding the flange. But here is what we ended up with. And I had to get, again, a bit creative with getting down into some of these areas to weld to deposit material, but it is welded outside and it's also welded inside, if you can see the bead right there. So this collector is plenty strong, and it should serve him well on his quest to go quicker and faster than he ever has. And I guess also on the inside, if you see down in there, maybe you can see possibly the transitioning that I did, just building up some weld on the inside there. And again, I like to do that rather than porting, as I like to add material, not remove material, to keep a part as strong as it can be. So this thing needs the turbine flange sanded still, which I'll do tomorrow. And then at that point, this can go back in the fixture and we can get to welding the 4 primaries that are sitting right over there. So I'm getting out of here for today. We'll reconvene tomorrow and keep making more progress on this. Today is welding day for Aaron's primaries. So yesterday we went ahead and did all of the wastegate provisioning, got the collector pretty well squared away, aside from sanding the bottom side of the turbine flange here, but I will do that later, as right now I really just want to get to welding. So I haven't really decided on any particular order of how I'm going to weld these. I might just go from most complex to least complex. So start with this one, to this one, to this one, and then finally end up on this one. Actually, yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. So let me take this over to the bench and get my purge plugs put in place, get a back purge started, and get to melting this together. Aaron has 4 welded primaries for his new exhaust manifold. So here's what we ended up with. And like I said, I started with the most complicated primary, worked to second most complicated, third most complicated, and then finally the simplest. And now we have all 4 of them welded and ready to go into the manifold, be part of that whole assembly. So what I'm going to do is get probably this primary, and then that one, once it cools down, get them prepped, tacked into place. I might try to weld as much as I can in this fixture, or I do have Aaron's old fixture over here. I may pull this aluminum block out and use this. Actually, I probably will do that. Use this as the head flange fixture once I get it tacked in his new fixture, just because this aluminum block is going to fare much better with actually holding the head flange in place, as opposed to the concoction of various flanges that I have on the new fixture. So once everything cools down, I'll get those 2 prepped, tacked in place, put everything on the aluminum block, and at that point in time, we'll be ready to weld. All right, scratch the last plan, new order of operations. So after thinking about this a little bit more, I'm going to weld everything in this fixture. This is where Aaron wants everything located, and this gets the position that he wants for the collector and the turbo in relation to the head flange and the engine. So I'll use this fixture, weld everything in here, and that will guarantee that everything's located exactly where he needs it to be. So I went ahead and I put fasteners in the rest of the head flange holes, tightened everything down there, and then on the outside where I have the 2 dowels, I just put a couple of C-clamps. That'll hold everything in place and allow me to weld without really the worry of warping anything. And this ends up being a pretty thick amount of material here to hold the head flange in shape. So we should be good to go with all of that. So I can go ahead now, get the first primary prepped, get it put in its place, tacked, ready to weld, and then strike an arc and get going on finishing this manifold. few sticks of filler rod and a couple hundred PSI worth of argon later, and Aaron's manifold is welded. So here is what we ended up with. I'm very happy with the end result. So nice curvature coming up to the collector, and this is really the busy section right here, obviously, as the rest of it is really just an angle, straight, and then we get into the craziness, into Medusa's hair right in here. Here is another view of it, and I really like the way that everything kind of snakes around other pieces there. I just think it looks really cool. So this thing is welded most of the way, but isn't quite finished up yet. We still need to come in, weld the insides of each of the head flange ports. I need to put individual EGT bungs in it. I need to put a BPA logo on it, and then sand the head flange, and do the final cleanup, QC, all of that before it gets shipped out to Aaron, and he can go really, really fast with it. But I need to get out of here for today, and we will reconvene in the next few days to get the rest of this wrapped up and get Aaron's new manifold on its way to him. And we're back to finish Aaron's manifold today. So, not in my normal shop attire. I actually went on another hawking hike this morning, and thankfully I did not bring the camera along to film it, as a nice weekend day. The trails were absolutely packed, and was not the best time I've had there, but I was still able to get a few miles underfoot, or a few miles on foot under my pack and everything else, and it still ended up being a good time. But that aside, we need to finish Aaron's manifold. And the first thing we're going to do in terms of finishing it are to install these, which if you guys can read that, we have it says 1/4" stainless steel weld-ons, but these are 4 EGT bungs that we'll be putting on the bottom side of his manifold. So what I need to do is mark out the location of them, which I typically try to get them equidistant from the head flange, as this is a good place to measure from. Mark them out equidistant, place them as close to the direct bottom side of the primary as I can, as that's where his wiring and where the sensors have sat on all of the other manifolds I've built for him. So I'll get those put in place, or get the holes drilled, get everything mocked up and ready for them to be put in place, tack them, weld them, so on and so forth, and then we can move on to putting a logo on this thing. With that last bit of cleanup and QC work, Aaron's new manifold is completed. So I'm very happy with how this thing came out. Again, it's a T4 twin scroll, very forward mount to house his new turbo. We have twin 44mm wastegate provisions, which the fun thing with these regular 44mm flanges, the Tile 44, the Turbo Smart 45, and the Precision 46mm, at least the V-band derivatives of all of those, use the same flange. So you can buy a 44mm flange and it'll fit all of those wastegates. But that aside, Aaron's manifold's completed. So have the logo obviously put in place and polished up. Head flange welds came out nicely. On the bottom side, we have all of his EGT bungs, and they're in their rightful homes and rightful spots, and really am happy with how this thing came out. And one note I'd like to make is, I'm not sure what the runtime of this video is going to be, but I do suspect it will be shorter than episode 1 of this 2-part series. And that was kind of intentional, and it was inadvertently intentional, as I want to make note that the finish work, like what I was doing in this episode, takes far less time than the foundational work when building a manifold. So if you spend your time on your fit up, on your collector building, collector design, all of that, the rest of it goes by much more quickly, and your time really should be spent in the fabrication process, or more time and more attention should be spent in the fabrication process as opposed to the welding and final assembly process. Now, that isn't to say that you can build a nice part and then half-ass the rest of it, but if you spend the time in the fab process, it makes the finishing process that much easier. So I hope that does make sense. But with this manifold being completed, let's put it back in its correct orientation. But with this manifold being completed, I think that's going to be about the end of this episode. So, as always, thank you guys for tuning in and watching all the things that go on around here, rather. Whether it be the Supra, whether it be the SRT4, whether it be building different manifolds, or anything in between all those things. I love having you guys come along for the journey with me. I love making these videos, and it makes me very happy when people reach out and say that they've actually received some value from these videos. It's that 100% is my intent with making them. So hopefully you found something or found value out of this one or this series, and hopefully I can continue to make videos like this in the future. But without going on anymore, that'll be the end of this one. So, as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I will see you guys in the next episode.